потому что да, они молчат все, они ничего не говорят. Они, да, понимают, да, нищие, что да. Чаец, кофец, пипец, нет? Я еще сегодня даже ничего ни кофейного вообще никакого. Ни шоколадного, ни кофейного, ничего. Что, давай какашка? Будешь какашка? Вчера есть, слышь? Никуда она у меня, не какашка. Хо-хо-шон. Хо-хо-шон. Ну ладно, ладно. Какаша, меня это не касается, что ты, блин, ты чё? Эй, Акуна, ты такая интересная штука. Ты смотри, вообще просто, да я борзела что ли, блин, да? Все нормально, здравствуйте, все хорошо у вас, нет, у вас анусом не запахло ли у вас случайно? Не надо, это же лишнее. Нормально для них просто такое. Не. Ладно. Так, что тут у нас? Да. Как тогда это надо туда засунуть. А, тебе нравится такой ракурс, так смотреть? Короче, Короче, bye-bye. Aklap. You can join me. Join me. You can join me. Join me. Okay. Bayan, bayan. Jokir, jokir, jokir. Bayar, bayar. Боянир. Боязейский свадьбы. Это еще штучка какая, знаешь. Не знаешь? Не штучка? Ты делал, да? Наоборот, что ты хотел себе тогда, да. Нет, что такое? Породок нет, да. Это наоборот, значит. Weather. А у меня какой выбор есть, смотри. Да, то есть ты пользу не приносишь, что надо делать? Надо шевелиться, чтобы, да. А что такое польза? Ты сразу становишься нехорошим человеком, да, понимаешь? Да. Memory do you need it?
I think we're unique because now, as you can see, we are in a studio atmosphere. We're not in.
Maestro by Men and Mice controls and ensures a smooth running of your network, offers automation, control and manage all your environment with a single unified API. Plug it into your existing networks easily and without disruption. We've been in the business of network management for 30 years, and we have the trust of many of the world's biggest companies who value our pioneering spirit and personable customer service. Men and Mice.
All right.
so with a lot of the lower-end graphics cards now making their way to announcements, I would say store shelves and maybe your computers, but let's face it, we know that's not happening. I bet that's what I sound like. I would say store. Alright, so with a lot of the lower-end graphics cards now making their way to announcements, I would say store shelves and maybe your computers, but let's face it, we know that's not happening. I bet that's what I sound like. They're not making their way to your systems or your retail shelves or e-tailers' warehouses because they're gone already. But we're going to talk about the 60 series graphics cards, and more importantly, now with the 6700 XT announcement, we're going to talk about RAM and the amount of GPU RAM that's available on these cards and whether or not it's a gimmick, why there's as much as there is, and is it a figure that you really need to consider while you're shopping, hypothetically, for your new graphics cards next year. The all-new 5000D mid-tower airflow case from Corsair features an optimized front panel for maximum ventilation, while the integrated cable management and tempered glass side panel means you can show off more of your components and not your cable mess. To see the full list of specs and to learn more about the 5000D's flexible fan mounting options perfect for both air cooling and water cooling enthusiasts, follow the sponsored link in the description below. Alright, so I don't have a 6700 XT here yet, but one of the things that you probably noticed with AMD is almost every one of their graphics cards in the 6000 series just has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Now AMD in the past would give you dual SKUs for each card. Let's say you had a 5700 XT, I believe this was actually still the case. Hypothetical, okay, fine, RX 480. You could get an RX 480 4GB or an RX 480 8GB. All of the numbers were the same in terms of the stream processors and ROPs and all that. The only difference was the amount of RAM on it. But as we move forward now, it's really started to get really weird in the, like I call that general market, which being the 60 series cards for NVIDIA and the lower AMD ones. The names are all kind of weird now, right? Let's talk about RAM. So the 3060 has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which made a lot of people confused, myself included, as to why they would put 12 I almost said gigarams, 12 gigarams on a 3060 and 8 gigabytes on a 3060 Ti. The 2060, if you recall, had 6 gigabytes of VRAM. But the reason why I call this extremely confusing is if we go back to the 10 series, which is what NVIDIA is actually comparing all the 3060 numbers to, because they never compare it to the previous gen. They always compare it to the gen before that, because that puts you closer to about a 4-year cycle, which a lot of people tend to upgrade every 4 to 5 years. So you can kind of see what the every other generation improvement is, which is affecting more people than annual upgrades. This was the GeForce GTX 1060. This was the first one that had launched. This is a 6 gigabyte card as well. Then they came out with a cheaper version, which was also a GTX 1060, but this is a 3 gigabyte card. But don't be fooled, we already did a video calling this one out. It had less CUDA cores and less everything, making it not really a 1060 and just a really shady marketing move from NVIDIA on this one. But 3 gigabytes of VRAM, as you guys know today, would absolutely not cut it. So if that's the case, why does the 3060 have 12 gigabytes of VRAM and the 3080 has 10 gigabytes of VRAM? Well, the way that the RAM is actually allocated has everything to do with the bus width. You got 128-bit bus, you have 192-bit bus, 384, and something we haven't seen in a long time, 512. And you'll notice that these are increments, right? The reason why it has 12 gigabytes of VRAM is because it would have had to have been stuck with either 6 or 12 because of the 192-bit bus. They wanted to go with a wider bus, giving it more memory performance and also allowing them to be able to go with a number higher than 6. If they were going to go with either a 4 or an 8 gigabyte variant, they would have had to reduce the memory bus width down to 128 gigabits. Wow, 128 bits, that's a lot. Gigabits, either a 4 or an 8 gigabyte variant, they would have had to reduce the memory bus width down to 128 gigabits. Wow, 128 bits, that's a lot. Gigabits, that's a lot of bits. They would have had to drop it down to a 128-bit bus, which would have then allowed them to be able to run 8 gigabytes of VRAM. But with a narrower memory bus, they would have had lesser performance as well. But I just wanted to kind of respond to that real quick, because it is a response I received from NVIDIA when I talked about it being just a memory allocation circle jerk between AMD and NVIDIA and who has the most RAM. We know AMD has the most RAM, but one of the things for today's video is actually going to be, how does that RAM actually affect your gaming experience? We know that 6 gigabytes of VRAM these days in 2021 with modern titles is probably not going to cut it, which means it makes sense that they went with the 12 gigabytes versus the 6 gigabytes if that's the limitations they were going to have on the 192-bit bus. See, when it comes to memory performance, it's not just how much of it do you have. That's just the size of the container. Now imagine the size of the container has an opening at the top, and how fast that memory can get in and out of it is going to depend on two things. One, the size of the opening, being your bus width, and then two, how fast that information can get in and out of that bucket, being your pump speed, or in this case, the memory speed. The information can get in and out of the size of the opening, being your bus width, and then two, how fast that information can get in and out of that bucket, being your pump speed, or in this case, the memory speed itself. So we have faster memory now, a bigger opening, and a bigger container, which theoretically is going to give you much better performance than if you had a smaller container with a smaller opening with the same size pump. And when I say same size pump, it's all GDDR6, which is going to give you very fast speeds. But if the fast speed is filling a smaller container that takes longer for it to cycle, then you can see there why those three figures can start to play in as to why they chose 12 gigabytes on the 3060. The reason why AMD is pretty much putting 16 gigabytes in everything is because they're kind of using the same bus for everything. So I think it's a little bit simpler over there, but they're not directly comparison apples to apples. In the architecture, that's something we already know. So what we're going to do is we've got our 3060 loaded up on our test bench here. And the reason why I'm doing these tests right now to show you, a lot of people get really hung up on the amount of VRAM that's in a card on making their buying choice. And the reason why I even brought up these 10 series cards is because if you were sitting here, let's say hypothetically these are 3060 cards, and you go, oh, I could save some money by going with a lesser amount of card, but it's all the same. Well, you're going to see right now that although we have 12 gigabytes on a 3060, some titles are not going to utilize anywhere near that, and some might get somewhat near there. But what you're going to find on the 3060 as well is that you have a bit of a surplus when it comes to the amount of memory. One other thing I want to point out is even the 10 gigabytes on the 3080, unless we're doing 4K gaming with high-resolution texture packs on super modern titles, do we see it go anywhere near that 10 gigabytes of VRAM. It's nice to have. Remember, it is GDDR6X, which means it's going to be a faster memory. And it's not only how big is the container and how big is the opening, how big is your pump, which is the speed. The pump matters as well. You have the biggest opening and the biggest container, and if you have a slow, dribbly pump, it's still going to suck, right? Use that metaphor however you want. All right, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to use Afterburner here to kind of show you guys some specs and what's happening with the card. That way we can sort of give you guys some real-world experience here, or I guess examples of what's happening. What we're looking at here is a couple of different things. This is our GPU temperature. That's the usage of our GPU. This is Ryzen 2 actually 3D rendered item.
Или это просто не такие спецы, да? Ну да. А чё, ладно.
Which is why it's at 100%. This is our core clock. This is our memory usage in megabytes. Now remember, this is a 12 gigabyte card. So as you can see in the menu, we're only using just under 2 gigabytes. We're going to change a couple settings here. I'm starting with some older titles, and we'll move our way to some of the newer, more demanding titles like Borderlands 3, stuff like that, to see if we can't get our usage to go anywhere near the 12 gigabytes. Because what I'm trying to show you here actually is that 8 gigs is really the sweet spot, and anything above 8 gigabytes is pretty much going to be overkill, which, to be honest, I'd rather have more memory than I need, because having not enough memory means you have to lower either your resolutions or your settings to get your memory under control. Now, one of the biggest factors of the amount of memory that you use are not just the settings, but the resolution at which you're applying those settings to. Specifically stuff like MSAA or any sort of anti-aliasing that is any sort of scaling anti-aliasing. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the settings here. This particular test, we have a custom preset. Everything is pretty much as high as it'll go. The resolution which we're running here is 1080p. Yes, this is an ultra-wide panel. You can see the black bars. We have it set to actual 1080p. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 1440 right now, because I'm curious to, even sitting in the menu, so even in the menu, we saw about a 200 megabyte jump in terms of usage. But I feel a lot of people that are going to be running 60 series cards are probably going to be on 1080p or 1440p panel, which is perfectly fine. I'm going to run this up to SSAA, or Super Sampling Anti-Aliasing 4X, and you can see that added just a little bit of that. We're almost at 2400 megabytes of usage, again, just in the menu. Now if we jump this up to 1440, look at that, almost 3 gigabytes of VRAM. Now what's funny is, this title existed at the time the 1063 gig did. As you can see, we're using almost the full amount of frame buffer in this graphics card in the damn menu. So you can see why we were pretty mad about the 3 gig ever even existing back in 2016, 2017. One thing you might notice too is as the game is loading, you're seeing the VRAM actually start to load as well. Yes, this is the very beginning of the game, but as you can see, we're already at 6 gigabytes of VRAM. So, had they chosen going with the 6 gigabyte option rather than 12 gigabyte, you could see how in an older title like this, even in 1080p without maxing out things like anti-aliasing, we would already be pretty damn close to that. But one thing to keep in mind when it comes to memory though is just like your system memory is it's not going to just automatically climb to whatever arbitrary number it wants to pull. The API knows how much VRAM is available to it, and it's going to dynamically start to adjust things to try and keep things underneath where it would crash. If it goes beyond the available VRAM, it's going to crash. So the biggest sign you're going to notice of not having enough VRAM is going to be major stutters, major pauses in your game, because what's effectively happening here is the video card's going to start sharing memory with the system. Now, having to go through the PCIe bus to the system memory, which is significantly slower than VRAM, and then storing that information and then accessing it again through system memory rather than to the disk, is what those pauses are. You're actually seeing the pause of that transfer taking place, and let's face it, you'd rather have it take place on the graphics card natively. What's funny is the way that it's so locked in right there at that 6119. It's not really like, it's not moving even 1 megabyte. So while we were loading the game, every single texture file, every whatever the game engine needs, oh, we went up 1, is stored into the VRAM. And so having enough VRAM available to it, or what you hear referred to as a buffer, is obviously very important. So let's just go to 2x. So that was a couple hundred megabytes. 4x. This is the highest setting we have for this title, which again, remember, there's like 5 years old
Сволочь, ты
now,
уже
it's
достал
5
просто
years
вообще.
old. So we're up at just under 7 gigs. So we're only using, I mean, about 65% of our RAM, which is good. Again, 1440p on a 60 series card, getting us probably around 60 FPS here if I had to make a guess. Not terrible. So as you can see, you're getting way more RAM than you need in this particular title. But again, this is not that new of a title. Games like this that have these areas that load, as you saw when we were loading the game, it loads in everything into VRAM as much as it can. The API goes, oh, we got 12 gigs available to us. We only need about 7,500 to get this done. We'll just load it all. That way it's not having to load anything while you're playing. However, sandbox games, games like Battle Royale type games that have very big worlds, Tom Clancy type games that have very big explore areas. As you move through the map, various areas of the map are going to load as you're going. So if you had enough VRAM to load as much in there as possible and have it be fast enough to where it can do it while you're gaming without causing any sort of stutters, that's where you'll start to notice having too little of a VRAM buffer can really start to affect your gameplay experience. Alright, so this is Borderlands 3. This is just the opening tutorial mission. It's not using that much VRAM, actually. Phil and I both expected to use more VRAM than that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just switch it to 1440 in the middle of this gameplay. We've been kind of keeping an eye on it, and it hasn't really even tried to load more memory. It's just really surprising us, to be honest. So 1440p, I hardly used any more. So this is just one of those titles that doesn't seem to really be all that demanding. Really, this done, we'll just load it all. That way it's not having to load anything while you're playing. However, sandbox games, like Battle Royale type games that have very big worlds, Tom Clancy type games that have very big explore areas. As you move through the map, various areas of the map are going to load as you're going. So if you had enough VRAM to load as much in there as possible and have it be fast enough to where it can do it while you're gaming without causing any sort of stutters, that's where you'll start to notice having too little of a VRAM buffer can really start to affect your gameplay experience. Alright, so this is Borderlands 3. This is just the opening tutorial mission. It's not using that much VRAM, actually. Phil and I both expected to use more VRAM than that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just switch it to 1440 in the middle of this gameplay. We've been kind of keeping an eye on it, and it hasn't really even tried to load more memory. It's just really surprising us, to be honest. So 1440p, I hardly used any more. So this is just one of those titles that doesn't seem to really be all that demanding, at least when it comes to VRAM. So we were using just under 4,600 megabytes. in the actual game, at least in the opening part, I think it might get a little bit more demanding. But I think given how low that number is right there, I think it's safe to say we're probably not going to get anywhere near even 8 gigabytes in the benchmark. All right, so it jumped up to 5140, but again, it's not changing at all during the test because, well, there it is right there. We're thinking that the benchmark here might be loading elements from all over the game into this one area, and that's one of the reasons why you're seeing the actual number increase. But remember, this is 1440p, which is going to be, for this card and this resolution, the biggest amount of demand you're going to see for memory in this particular title, not even using half of the amount of VRAM that is available on this graphics card. So, again, showing pretty promising numbers that if this was an 8 gigabyte card, that there would be plenty of VRAM even at 8 gigs. Alright, so we're using Wildlands now because it's more of a sandbox world, but you can see we're getting an obvious glitch here with our on-screen display as it's loading. Clearly, it's funny, you can actually see it loading as it goes. It's so neat to watch. Okay, so as you can see, again, very low memory usage.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, put your freaking guns away.
Too many civilian casualties. Okay, I was expecting it to use more VRAM than this. Oh god! Ah! Oh god! Ah! Hola, piggy!
Wait, what bacon? Express bacon.
This looks like my room when I was in high school. Alright, so I guess Wildlands is not one of those titles that really has an issue. Alright, so this is Control, but DLSS is on. And the reason why I have it on is the fact that the DLSS has to fit in the frame buffer as well. I'm not very far into the game, but look, here we are again, still right around that 4,000, 4,500 mark. As the fight's going on, though, the buffer usage is kind of going up slightly. Alright, so let's do the fight again in 1440p and see if we go above 5100. So what I did right now is I actually turned